What if I told you your smartphone, your laptop, your electric car, every tech gadget and device you use and see around you resonates a different story now than what you think? Right now, at this very moment, the technological foundation of our world is being quietly torn apart. For decades, the United States and China built the modern world together. Innovation flowed in both directions. Supply chains intertwined across oceans. However, that era of cooperation is rapidly ending. The invisible threads connecting these two technological giants are snapping one by one. This is not simply about trade disputes. This represents a fundamental restructuring of how technology develops and spreads across the planet. Most people remain unaware that the ground beneath the global technology landscape is shifting. So what exactly is happening, and why does it matter to you? Let me take you through the biggest technological transformation of our generation. For 3 decades, American and Chinese technology ecosystems grew deeply interconnected. Companies from both nations contributed essential pieces to global supply chains. Chinese firms advanced from contract manufacturing into world-leading innovation in telecommunications, mobile payments, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. Meanwhile, American companies relied heavily on Chinese manufacturing expertise, supply chain efficiency, and increasingly on Chinese consumer markets. This partnership created the devices you use every single day. However, something fundamental has shifted. The cooperation that built our modern world is unraveling at an alarming pace. The invisible threads connecting Silicon Valley to Shenzhen, connecting innovation hubs in Beijing to research centers in Boston, are breaking apart. As a result, the ripple effects touch every smartphone, every electric car, and every piece of artificial intelligence we interact with. Therefore, understanding this transformation matters to everyone who lives in the modern world. The consequences will reshape innovation itself, determine where products are made, and redefine how nations compete. In other words, we are witnessing the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another. But what caused this split in the first place? The tensions did not appear overnight. They emerged gradually from mounting concerns on all sides. American policymakers grew increasingly worried about dependencies on foreign technology infrastructure. They saw critical technologies being produced abroad with limited domestic control. National security officials raised alarms about data flows and potential vulnerabilities. At the same time, China pursued its Made in China 2025 initiative. This ambitious plan aimed to achieve technological self-sufficiency and leadership across strategic industries. Chinese leaders wanted to move beyond being the world's factory and establish the country as a center of innovation. Nonetheless, this shift alarmed Western governments who interpreted it as a challenge to their technological dominance. Flashpoints began to multiply. Huawei became the most visible battlefield. The Chinese telecommunications giant had become a global leader in network equipment and smartphone technology. However, it faced accusations of security risks and was banned from building networks across the United States, Australia, and several European countries. In contrast, China viewed these moves as attempts to contain a successful competitor. Meanwhile, SMIC, China's leading chipmaker, found itself on restricted lists that limited access to advanced manufacturing equipment. Therefore, its ability to produce cutting-edge semiconductors hit significant barriers. TikTok entered the spotlight for different reasons. The widely successful app raised concerns about data collection and content influence. As a result, it faced potential bans in several markets. However, many observers noted perceived double standards in how different platforms were treated. These headline cases represent only the surface of a deeper transformation. Software restrictions now limit what Chinese companies can access from American platforms. Export controls prevent the sale of advanced computing equipment to Chinese firms. Meanwhile, China has leverage of its own. The country controls vast supplies of rare earth elements essential for electronics manufacturing. China also leads globally in battery technology, solar panel production, high-speed rail, and mobile payment infrastructure. Therefore, any disruption in these supply chains creates immediate consequences worldwide. Data barriers are rising on both sides. Both nations are building walls around information flows. In essence, the digital world is fragmenting along geopolitical lines. Trust and cooperation have eroded significantly. Each side views the other with growing suspicion. So with all this tension building, how are companies responding? Faced with mounting uncertainty, companies worldwide are fundamentally rethinking their strategies. Two concepts have emerged as guiding principles. The first is friendshoring, which means relocating production to countries that share political values. The second is nearshoring, which involves moving manufacturing closer to home markets. In practice, these strategies translate into a massive geographic reshuffling. Factories that operated profitably for decades are being replicated or relocated. India, Vietnam, and Mexico have become primary beneficiaries of this shift. Indian officials actively court technology manufacturers with incentives and infrastructure investments. Vietnam has transformed rapidly into a major hub for electronics assembly. Meanwhile, Mexico attracts investment from companies serving the North American market. Nonetheless, this transition faces significant challenges. The China Plus One strategy has become the compromise many companies adopt. They maintain existing operations in China while building capacity elsewhere. This approach hedges risk, but doubles complexity and costs. Moreover, alternative locations face obstacles that cannot be quickly overcome. Infrastructure remains underdeveloped in many emerging hubs. Roads, ports, and power systems cannot yet match what China built over 3 decades. Workforce issues also arise frequently. China benefits from millions of highly trained factory workers and deeply integrated supply chain networks. Replicating that sophisticated ecosystem takes years of sustained investment. Therefore, production costs inevitably rise during the transition. Some companies discover that reducing dependence on China is far harder than anticipated. Critical components still only exist in Chinese factories. Specialized manufacturing expertise cannot be easily transferred. As a result, complete decoupling remains impractical for many industries. However, the broader trend toward diversification is undeniable and accelerating. The world is not deglobalizing in the traditional sense. Trade continues at high volumes. Instead, globalization is realigning along new axes shaped by political considerations. Political alignment now shapes economic decisions in ways not seen since the Cold War. Regional blocs are forming based on shared interests and strategic partnerships. In other words, the era of purely efficiency-driven supply chains has ended permanently. Resilience and security now compete with cost as primary factors. Companies must balance economic optimization with risk management. But in this massive shift, who actually benefits and who loses? This realignment creates clear winners in unexpected places. India stands to gain enormously. The country offers a massive workforce, democratic governance, and rapidly growing technical capabilities. Foreign investment is pouring into Indian manufacturing, particularly in electronics and pharmaceuticals. Vietnam has already emerged as a major electronics hub, attracting investment from Samsung, Apple suppliers, and numerous multinationals. Its strategic location and competitive costs make it attractive for companies diversifying production. Meanwhile, Mexico benefits from proximity to the United States and existing trade agreements. Automotive and electronics manufacturers are expanding Mexican operations substantially. However, China is not simply accepting decline. The country has responded strategically with its dual circulation strategy. This approach emphasizes strengthening domestic consumption and fostering homegrown innovation. Chinese policymakers are investing massively in self-sufficiency for critical technologies. Semiconductor production receives enormous subsidies despite technical challenges. Battery technology and electric vehicles remain areas where China leads globally and continues extending its advantage. Solar panels, wind turbines, and renewable energy represent other areas of Chinese dominance. In addition, China is deepening ties with countries outside the Western sphere. It offers technology transfer and infrastructure investment through the Belt and Road Initiative to nations across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Therefore, while losing some Western business, China is building alternative networks and spheres of influence. Chinese companies are also moving up the value chain, competing directly with Western firms in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology. Western companies and consumers face a more complicated picture. Some firms benefit from government support to reshore production. Subsidies for semiconductor manufacturing and tax incentives provide financial cushions. Nonetheless, they also confront substantially higher costs and fragmented markets. Innovation may slow when collaboration becomes difficult and talent pools shrink. Meanwhile, consumers in developed economies will likely see effects on their wallets. Products may become more expensive as companies pass along higher costs. Technology advancement could decelerate if research ecosystems remain divided. On the other hand, some argue that competition could spur innovation as different systems compete for superiority. The truth likely falls somewhere between these predictions. This transition creates both opportunities and obstacles. No side wins completely, and no side loses entirely. Instead, the global economy is becoming multipolar with multiple centers of power and innovation. But which specific industries are feeling the biggest impact? Semiconductors sit at the absolute heart of this technological divorce. These tiny chips power everything from smartphones to weapons systems. Their importance cannot be overstated. Therefore, controlling semiconductor design and manufacturing has become a matter of national security. The United States maintains leadership in chip design, but moved manufacturing overseas. Taiwan became the world leader through companies like TSMC. South Korea, through Samsung, emerged as critical in memory chips. However, geopolitical tensions have exposed dangerous vulnerabilities. As a result, the United States, Japan, and Europe are investing hundreds of billions to rebuild domestic chip manufacturing. New plants are under construction, though they will take years to reach full capacity. Meanwhile, China faces significant obstacles in advancing its capabilities. American export controls restrict access to advanced equipment made by companies like ASML. Without these tools, producing the most powerful chips remains extremely difficult. Nonetheless, China continues investing massively to bridge the gap through domestic alternatives and incremental improvements. The electric vehicle revolution adds another critical dimension. Batteries represent the core technology determining range, cost, and performance. China currently dominates global battery production and controls much of the supply chain for critical materials. Lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements flow primarily through Chinese processing facilities. Chinese companies like CATL and BYD have become world leaders through sustained investment. Therefore, countries pushing electric vehicle adoption find themselves heavily dependent on Chinese supply chains. Western nations are scrambling to secure alternative sources and build domestic capacity. However, this transformation takes years and requires massive investment. In the meantime, China leverages its position to support its own industry. Chinese EV makers like BYD are expanding globally, offering competitive prices enabled by integrated supply chains. Meanwhile, traditional Western automakers struggle to match Chinese efficiency while navigating supply chain diversification. Consumer electronics and artificial intelligence are splitting into separate ecosystems. Smartphones now run on different systems depending on the market. Chinese apps like WeChat and Alipay operate separately from Western equivalents. Cloud computing divides along national lines. Artificial intelligence development proceeds on separate tracks with different priorities. American companies focus on large language models and consumer applications. Chinese firms emphasize computer vision, manufacturing optimization, and smart city infrastructure. Standards and protocols are diverging. Equipment becomes less compatible across borders. In essence, the digital world is creating distinct spheres of influence. Consumers may not notice immediately, but over time the separation will become more apparent. Innovation that once flowed freely now faces barriers and parallel development. So how should we navigate this increasingly complex world? The fundamental logic governing global business is transforming. For decades, efficiency ruled supreme. Companies optimized for cost, speed, and just-in-time delivery. Supply chains stretched across oceans to find the most efficient production. However, recent disruptions exposed the fragility of this approach. Pandemics, trade wars, and geopolitical tensions can instantly paralyze systems built only for efficiency. Therefore, companies are embracing a new paradigm. Resilience now competes with efficiency as a core objective. Diversification replaces concentration. Multiple suppliers across different regions reduce single points of failure. Regional networks become more attractive despite higher costs. Stockpiles and redundancy, once dismissed as wasteful, now provide critical insurance. Trade blocs and partnerships are emerging as organizing structures. The Quad, consisting of the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, coordinates on technology and supply chain security. The European Union deepens cooperation with Japan and South Korea on semiconductors and resilience. Meanwhile, BRICS nations explore alternatives to Western-dominated systems. China's Belt and Road Initiative creates infrastructure connections across continents. These groupings reflect the multipolar nature of the emerging order. No single nation dominates completely. Instead, overlapping networks shape the flow of goods and technology in complex patterns. Innovation faces both headwinds and opportunities. Short-term progress may slow in some areas. Collaboration becomes harder when researchers cannot easily share findings. Talent pools fragment when visa restrictions limit movement. Companies must duplicate efforts across separated markets. Nonetheless, competition can also drive innovation. Multiple research centers may produce diverse approaches. Government support can accelerate development that markets might not prioritize. Furthermore, necessity breeds creativity. Companies forced to find alternatives may discover better solutions. Universities may focus more on fundamental research. The tension between competition and collaboration will define this transition. Nations compete for technological leadership and economic advantage. However, humanity faces global challenges requiring cooperation. Climate change, pandemic preparedness, and space exploration demand coordinated responses. Finding the balance between these forces will determine outcomes. Will this lead toward shared prosperity or destructive rivalry? The answer remains uncertain and depends on choices made in coming years. The era of effortless globalization is ending. That simple world where innovation and production happened seamlessly across borders is being replaced by something far more complex. We are entering a multipolar economy where political alignment shapes economic relationships. Supply chains are becoming regional rather than universal. Technology ecosystems are diverging along geopolitical lines. However, this transformation brings both challenges and opportunities. Companies must navigate higher costs and complexity. Consumers may face higher prices. Nations compete for advantage in strategic industries. Nonetheless, Diversification creates resilience against shocks. Regional development spreads opportunity more broadly. Competition can spur innovation and new approaches. The future will not resemble the past, but that does not mean it will be worse. It will simply be different, requiring adaptation and new thinking from everyone involved. The world is changing fast. Stay curious, stay informed, and subscribe to Factopiax.